Britain is often celebrated as the birthplace of the modern world, the first industrial nation, the pioneer of democracy, trade, and finance. But beneath that shining legacy lies another creation: modern poverty. A system of deprivation not born from famine or plague, but from policy, economics, and the deliberate reshaping of society itself. To understand how it began, we must return to the dawn of the modern age, 18th century Britain. Before factories and machines, Britain was a nation of farmers. For centuries, land was shared through a system known as the commons, where villagers grazed animals, gathered firewood, and grew food together. Poverty existed, but it was softened by access to land, the foundation of survival. That balance shattered in the 1700s. Parliament passed a series of enclosure acts, allowing wealthy landowners to fence off and privatize the commons. Between 1750 and 1850, over 6 million acres, nearly 1/4 of England, were enclosed. The language of the time praised efficiency and progress, but for the rural poor, it meant eviction. Entire communities were uprooted as land that had sustained them for generations became private property. Those who resisted were branded vagrants. Historians would later call this agrarian capitalism, but to those living through it, it was simply displacement. The enclosures created two new classes: landowners and laborers. Wealth concentrated in a few hands, while the rest were forced to depend on wages. It was the first great transformation, the separation of people from the land and of work from survival. This marked the birth of a new kind of poverty, not the absence of food, but the loss of independence. As rural families poured into cities, they found something waiting: the Industrial Revolution. From Manchester's cotton mills to Birmingham's foundries, Britain became the workshop of the world. But industrialization did not eliminate poverty. It mechanized it. Urban workers labored 16 hours a day in unsafe, suffocating factories. Wages were barely enough to survive, and child labor was rampant. By 1833, the first Factory Act banned children under 9 from working, not because poverty had ended, but because it had become unbearable to witness. In 1842, a government report on child minors horrified Parliament. It described boys as young as 6 crawling through tunnels no taller than their shoulders, hauling coal for 12 hours in darkness. This was not an accident. It was a system. The Industrial Revolution produced immense wealth, but that wealth flowed upward. Owners accumulated fortunes, workers accumulated fatigue. By the 1850s, Britain's GDP had doubled compared to a century earlier. Yet the life expectancy for the urban poor in cities like Manchester was just 26 years. The new economy had created a paradox: prosperity built on poverty. Britain's response to this crisis was not generosity, it was control. The old poor laws had existed since Elizabethan times, but in 1834 they were reformed under the new Poor Law Act. Its goal was clear: to make poverty so unpleasant that only the truly desperate would seek help. Thus was born the workhouse, a place designed to punish need. Inside, families were separated, stripped of their belongings, and forced into hard labor for food and shelter. Conditions were intentionally cruel: thin gruel, cold rooms, rigid discipline. It was called moral reform, but history remembers it as institutional cruelty. Charles Dickens captured its horror in Oliver Twist, but for thousands, this was daily reality. By 1840, more than 500 workhouses across England and Wales housed over 200,000 people. This new ideology, that poverty must be earned, explained, or punished, became one of Britain's most enduring exports. As Britain built an empire abroad, it built hierarchies at home. By the late 19th century, London was the richest city on earth, and one of the most unequal. While aristocrats dined beneath chandeliers, millions lived in slums without clean water or sanitation. In 1889, social investigator Charles Booth mapped London house by house. His color-coded maps revealed a shocking truth: extreme poverty existed just steps away from extreme wealth. Nearly 30% of Londoners lived in chronic want. These were the working poor, people with jobs, yet still destitute. They built the railways, cleaned the streets, and powered the factories, yet could not afford to live decently. Britain's empire extracted wealth from India, Africa, and the Caribbean, but the same principle governed life at home: hierarchy, dependence, and discipline. Britain's industrial might gave the world steam engines and telegraphs, but it also created a system where poverty was not an accident, but an accepted feature of progress. As cities expanded, the old parish relief system collapsed. Small village charities were overwhelmed by urban misery. The government's answer was not empathy, but efficiency. In 1834, the Poor Law Amendment Act established the Poor Law Commission, one of Britain's first modern bureaucracies. Its mission: to standardize rules, cut costs, and centralize control. For the first time, poverty became a matter of national administration. Relief was divided into two types: indoor, for those in workhouses, and outdoor, for those given small payments at home. The Commission's goal was to eliminate outdoor relief entirely, forcing the poor into workhouses instead. The workhouse wasn't designed to solve poverty. It was designed to manage it. Ledgers and reports replaced compassion, reducing suffering to data. Officials recorded meals served and costs saved, turning human pain into statistics. This was the birth of bureaucratic poverty management, where morality and economics merged into policy. The poor were divided into categories: the deserving and the undeserving, the able-bodied and the idle. Reform had turned into control. The poor laws didn't eliminate poverty, they organized it. By the early 1900s, Britain's slums had become impossible to ignore. Doctors and reformers exposed the truth. The poor were not lazy. They were trapped. In London's East End, families crowded into single rooms, sharing toilets with dozens of others. Tuberculosis and malnutrition were rampant. Studies by Booth and Rowntree showed that up to 1/3 of Britons lived below the poverty line, many of them working full-time. For the first time, poverty was being measured scientifically, and its true causes, low wages, poor housing, and inequality, were impossible to deny. The liberal reforms of the early 1900s, old age pensions, school meals, and unemployment insurance, were Britain's first real attempt to soften the system, but they did not dismantle it. The structure of modern poverty, low pay, insecure housing, limited welfare, remained intact. By the 1930s, the Great Depression exposed its fragility. As industries collapsed, unemployment soared to over 20%. Hunger marches filled the streets. The government responded with the same logic as before: means tests, work schemes, and moral discipline. Then came the war. World War II forced Britain to rethink everything. If the state could organize rationing and conscription, could it not also organize fairness? In 1942, economist William Beveridge published his landmark report, a plan to defeat the 5 giants: want, disease, ignorance, squalor, and idleness. It became the blueprint for the modern welfare state. After 1945, Britain built the National Health Service, expanded education, and created social housing. For a generation, poverty declined. It seemed the cycle had finally broken. But the reprieve didn't last. By the late 1970s, economic crises and inflation opened the door for a new ideology, one that looked strikingly familiar. Margaret Thatcher's government dismantled much of the welfare system, privatized industries, and weakened trade unions. Her belief was simple: markets, not governments, should decide outcomes. But markets are not moral. As council homes were sold off and social housing declined, homelessness began to rise. The share of income going to the top 1% climbed again. By the 1990s, child poverty had tripled compared to the 1970s. The state had returned to its old logic, that poverty must be disciplined, not prevented. Workhouses no longer existed, but their spirit survived in benefit sanctions, means testing, and low-wage labor markets. Modern Britain no longer speaks of moral failure, but the mindset remains. Those on benefits face digital surveillance, sanctions, and endless assessments. In 2013, universal credit was introduced to simplify welfare. But delays and cuts left families waiting weeks for payments. Research shows that the bottom 20% of households have seen almost no real income growth for more than a decade. The divide is no longer between work and idleness, but between stability and precarity. A single illness, missed paycheck, or rent increase can push a family into crisis. And yet the cultural attitude toward poverty, suspicion, judgment, conditionality, remains deeply embedded in Britain's institutions. It is not just policy, it is a legacy. If Britain invented modern poverty, it also invented the tools to study and expose it, from Booth's maps to Beveridge's reports. And the data tells a haunting truth. In 1900, around 30% of Britons lived in poverty. By 1960, that number had fallen to 15%. By 2020, it had risen again, above 22%. Centuries of progress, yet the structure remains. Britain built machines that transformed the world, but it also built a social order that measured value by productivity, not humanity. The lesson is clear and deeply uncomfortable. Poverty is not the opposite of progress, it is its companion. As Britain exported its models of finance, law, and governance across the globe, it also exported its ideas about poverty. Colonial administrations in India and Africa imposed systems of taxation, labor control, and dependency. Workhouses inspired colonial labor camps and indentured labor systems. The idea that poverty must be managed, not eradicated, became part of global governance. Even today, welfare reforms and austerity echo those same principles. Efficiency over empathy, productivity over dignity. Poverty, as Britain invented it, was never simply about lacking money. It was about power, who holds it, who defines it, and who benefits when others have less. In its pursuit of progress, Britain didn't just build an empire. It built a model the world still struggles to unlearn. A model where prosperity and poverty are not opposites, but partners in the same story. If you found this story thought-provoking, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Pastify Hub, where history's hidden truths come to light.